Well, first of all, this is Peter Welch, and I want to thank everyone for being here and look forward to a discussion about this extraordinary circumstance that we face, a once-in-a-100-year challenge. I want to thank Anson Tebbetts, our Secretary of Agriculture, for being on, who'll be speaking in a few minutes, and our sugar makers who are on, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Just step back for a second. It's obviously astonishing what's going on because it's affected all of us both in profound ways. And it has happened so suddenly that it's hard to imagine that it was on March 14, a little over a month ago, that I was on the floor of the House at 1 in the morning. And it was when we were finally starting to take the coronavirus issue seriously. And that is when we were voting on what we thought at that point was a big coronavirus package that was about $100 billion. And it was to provide paid family leave for people who had to quarantine or take care of kids. It was getting some money into the healthcare system. It was getting some money for testing. But we had 600 members, or pardon me, 400. We had 600 people on the House floor. So there was discussion about social distancing, but we literally had all the members of Congress at 1 in the morning on the floor together in what obviously in retrospect was just a really hazardous health situation, about 150 staff members. And that day earlier on Friday, I was in a committee hearing with about 150 people where we were listening to Dr. Fauci really warn us that it was time to social isolate. And then the next day I come home, and of course our governor has been taking the lead on this. He had issued the emergency order, and as I was driving down the interstate from Burlington to Windsor County where I live, there were basically no cars on the road. And then having to deal with the reality that, yes, we have to socially isolate and separate in order to protect our health and protect the health of people we love, and to do that all together. So by each of us doing our part on social separation, that we would benefit all of us and bend that curve. And of course, it looks like that's paying off right now in Vermont. But the collateral impact of that was literally turn the lights off on the economy. And people's first reaction, as I experienced it, was some anxiety about the well-being, the health well-being of yourself, but particularly people you love and your friends and neighbors. But then the challenge that folks had to face, people who had a business and were affected by the stay home, stay safe policy that was necessary, people who lived paycheck to paycheck and were really desperate to figure out how they were going to pay for groceries or rent. So it's been really a challenge. But it was so clear that it needed an unprecedented response from the federal government, the only entity that has the fiscal capacity and flexibility to meet the challenge. Was in that week after March 14, in a relief package largely negotiated with Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, two folks who are not ordinarily like-minded, shall we say. They came up with a $2.2 trillion package to provide some economic stabilization in a lifeline for businesses and individuals. And of course, that was the unemployment supplement, $600 federal on top of whatever someone was entitled to from the state, made it unemployment eligibility for self-employed and independent contractors. And we have thousands and thousands of Vermonters that way. It started the payroll protection plan, which was immediately depleted of funds within 2 weeks, but it's been very good for Vermont business. About 7,000 businesses have made it across the finish line, and it's provided funding that will turn into a loan to a grant of about $1 billion. And it provided money to our hospitals that is really, really important. And it provided money to our state, which is really going to be essential, because obviously with the revenue collapse in all of our states, including Vermont, and the explosion of expenses down the road, that's going to play a very punishing impact on local property taxpayers potentially. You know, how do we educate our kids? How do we provide health care through the Medicaid program when our budget is getting so hammered? So there's more work to be done. And as you may know, Congress yesterday afternoon, I was in Washington, and we voted on another coronavirus package to replenish the funds for the payroll protection plan. There's a lot of Vermont businesses that filled out their applications but didn't get approved before the money ran out. So now there's going to be a second chance. And that legislation, by the way, specifically designates ag as being eligible to participate in the SBA programs, the Payroll Protection Plan and the Emergency Income Disaster Program. It also, that program we voted on yesterday included $100 billion for health, 75 that will go to the hospitals, and then very, very importantly, 25 billion that goes to testing. You know, the way we have to proceed on this to get on top of the virus is one, social distancing that helps bring the slope of that curve down, bend the curve, but then and that means that we have hospital capacity to treat people who have the virus or who have other health illnesses, and we don't overload it and collapse, somewhat like we saw in New York. But then you have to do testing so that you can identify people who are positive. Then we have to do contact tracing to try to track down folks who've been exposed to that person to see if they have it or don't. And that's all about finding and locating hotspots. And then you have to have a quarantine system where any of us who is tested positive, we can self-isolate. And that, by the way, has to include some stipend for people who are going to be willing to take a test that if the results are positive, they may lose their paycheck. So there's been just, I think, two things. One, a very swift and clear response from the governor of Vermont, and it's the governors in all of our states who bear the primary responsibility for these decisions that affect our health. And my take is that the governor has been clear and consistent and swift on this, and that Vermonters have been supportive of taking the steps that the health folks in the science and the data says we should take. And it's reassuring to me that we've got a data-driven, scientific-based approach to this. Then the role for the federal delegation, Bernie, Patrick, and me, is to try to get economic relief back to individuals, to businesses, to the state, to our healthcare system. And so far we're doing that, I'm pleased to say, on a bipartisan basis. But we've got to stay the course. And I've talked to some of you about the maple industry. I was talking to Emma, and I'll be interested in hearing from you, but it sounds like maple has not had the devastating impact on it that dairy has had. It's been so brutal. But that's the point of this call. What is affecting you? What can we do to be helpful? So, and by the way, just last little anecdote. It's strange to go to the airport. You know, I haven't been there since May. Usually I go down and back every week. But since when I came back on March 14, I've been at home. It's been very nice in that sense. But I had to go down Wednesday to vote, and for the Thursday vote. And the airport in Burlington was empty. The airport in Washington was it was empty. The plane down, I think there were 3 people on it and 3 employees of American Airlines. When I came back last night on the 10:20 flight, I was literally the only person on the plane. They had 2 cabin attendants, but I was the only person on the plane. I mean, it's just so surreal what is happening in our economy and has happened so suddenly and dramatically. So I'll stop there and turn it over. Anson, I really want to say thank you for your hard work and a lifetime of hard work on behalf of Vermont agriculture. Anson Tebbett, Secretary of Agriculture of the state of Vermont.
Thank you, Congressman. And I did see your image last night of you on the airplane, and I think that spoke to what we're in the midst of. And it was quite telling, and it told the entire story that what we're going through with you being on that plane all alone with your mask on and a big plane. And normally it would be hard to get a seat on that plane coming back to Vermont. So that was pretty amazing image. If people haven't seen it, get a chance to look at it. Well, thank you for your leadership, Congressman. I know you've held a number of these calls, whether it be about labor or dairy, whatever, and it's great to hop on the phone with our sugar makers. I think the last time I was together with the sugar makers was at a joyous event where we were tapping the tree with Governor Scott in Franklin County at the Gagne Sugar House, but there was a certain cloud that was all over us because we knew something was coming with the pandemic. We didn't know what it was. But shortly after that, things began to ramp down and shut down, and it was right during the sugaring season. And I know that was difficult for a number of our sugar makers because they take great pride in opening the their sugar houses during open house weekend, and those had to be canceled. We had a big festival in St. Albans this year that couldn't happen, in St. Johnsbury it couldn't happen. So those events have had to be put on hold, and I bet they'll be back next year. And in the meantime, our sugar makers were busy in the sugar house, a little lonely at times this year because visitors couldn't come, but there they were producing beautiful maple syrup for us. I just want to go over a couple of things that may be of interest for our sugar makers. Today, the governor issued new guidance on farmers markets. Our farmers markets can reopen under certain conditions on May 1, and I know some of our sugar makers may want to sell at farmers markets. Those can return. They're not going to be social events, but we can still get fresh produce and dairy and maple to the public, which is really important at this time. Congressman, thank you for doing the heavy lifting on those federal programs with SBA. It was great to see that under the EIDL program, that farmers are now eligible with that new change that you did yesterday with Congress. So I encourage everyone to reach out and poke around those programs, whether it's the Payroll Protection Program or EIDL through SBA. We have a resource page that's on our Vermont Agriculture page, and I would just encourage everyone to seek out whatever you can, poke around. If there's some dollars that might be available for folks, it may be worth a try to work with your lender or with their FSA and USDA and also reach out to us. So that's what I have to offer. I want to congratulate all our sugar makers. I'm really excited to hear how the season went. We'll know, I think, in mid-June when the USDA kicks out the survey and repeats once again that I suspect Vermont will be #1 again, producing the most maple in the United States with well over 2 million gallons. So thank you, Congressman, and I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Anson. And now Allison Hope from Vermont Maple Sugar Makers Association. Allison?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman and Secretary Tebbets. I know you've both been super supportive of agriculture in Vermont, especially now, and especially maple. So we appreciate the attention that you're giving the federal and state resources for all of our sugar makers over regular emails, which I hope has been helpful to folks. And we just sent around an e-newsletter a couple of days ago, and we did a short survey in that newsletter to talk about, or just to find from folks how their season went. And I'm looking at those results now. It looks like most of the people who responded said they made more syrup than expected, which is nice to hear. And I've heard this before through the season. I'm curious what Emma and Mark from UVM Extension have heard, but lower than normal sugar content for folks. Some say average, some say it was higher earlier, but most folks say low. We asked folks what the best thing about this sugaring season was. A lot of folks said really good sap runs, made some really good flavored syrup. Really enjoyed being in the sugar house. somebody even said that they have 2 kids, one in college and one in high school, and they don't usually get them in the sugar house so much, but because of the shutdown, they actually got more family time in the sugar house with their kids. And then, as expected, when we asked folks what's the worst thing about this season, I think it was, it was a little bit lonely for folks. They didn't have the crowds that they would have liked. They didn't have visitors or a social buzz. Missing open house weekend and things like that. So if folks are noticing that they need more resources or they need information that we haven't been sharing, I hope they'll be in touch with us. And I think while we do the Q&A section at the end, if folks have questions, since we have 45 people on the call, it would probably be easiest when we get back to Q&A with Congressman Welch to have folks use the, if you're online, use the chat version. So there's a note at the bottom, and you can just click on that and ask a question in that group, and then we can go through those. Emma, are you on the call?
I am indeed.
Well, hello. Your name shows up as Ryan because you're using that link. I see that. All right.
How funny.
Emma, I know. I edited mine on the computer. So Emma wears 2 hats, actually, as board chair of VMSMA, as most of you know, and also at Butternut Mountain Farm. So Emma, what have you been hearing? And what
Yeah, so for you all hosting this call and providing sugar makers an opportunity to get it directly and also to share sort of where we're at. So thank you for creating this opportunity. What I've experienced this season is that as sugar makers, we all know every sugaring season is a bit different, and this one will certainly go down in the record books as being particularly unique. That said, everything we have heard from the producers that we work with here at Butternut Mountain Farm suggests that this season was better than last season, and folks have produced a really great crop of Vermont maple syrup this year. There are certainly challenges ahead of us as an industry, primarily posed by the COVID pandemic. It comes from multiple directions. For those folks that sell directly to consumers, the loss of the opportunity to interact with their customers during the sugaring season poses a real challenge going forward. For those that have developed direct selling with local food service accounts, those markets have diminished significantly or evaporated completely. For businesses like mine, Butternut Mountain Farm, where we're highly diversified, our retail segment of sales, those sales that we make to retailers, has been incredibly strong. Demand is stronger than we've ever experienced. And that in and of itself poses challenges, ensuring that everybody who wants pure maple syrup can get the maple syrup that they're looking for. It's a problem that we're certainly up for the challenge, but in light of trying to keep staff here safe, the producers we work with safe, having adequate personal protection, keeping social distancing, and making sure we have systems and processes in place to ensure everybody's well-being makes that meeting that increased demand really, really challenging. And certainly any additional support that food companies like ours could get in terms of that essential personal protection, face masks, is really, really useful. And Congressman, you highlighted the need for testing as things open up. clearly support for essential businesses in terms of making sure there's adequate access to testing so that folks can stay healthy is critically important, and we can understand, where there may be the beginnings of an outbreak. Finally, I would just say that I think, certainly it's the case for my family. As we look at the challenges ahead of us, the one thing we find an amazing amount of gratitude for is the fact that we get to continue to do what we love doing every day. We get to be out in the woods, taking care of the woods, sugaring, and we feel incredibly grateful to be able to be out there providing a healthy, comforting food for people at a time when that's something we're all looking for. So we're really grateful to be able to do that, and I suspect that sentiment is sentiment felt across the industry by all of the sugar makers here in Vermont. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Mark to sort of offer his insights on the season and where things are at, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Emma, for everything. But there is a big recognition that if we're going to have the comprehensive testing we need, we have to have testing that is done that's convenient for citizens and workers. So having testing at work sites, I think, is extremely important. And obviously having the personal protective gear to maintain safe work sites is really essential. And I see that as a federal function to get those supplies back to the states so that you have what you need. So thank you. And Mark?
Yes, Representative Welch, thank you very much for hosting the call. And I certainly appreciate the opportunity to bring you up to speed a little bit. A lot of producers have certainly had a good season. I have heard from a few who were under what they expected, but by and large, I think when the totals are in, we'll be at or above the anticipated crop. Certainly some reports of low sap sweetness, but luckily for producers, that came along with pretty good sap runs. So their wood pile went down pretty fast, but total production was on par for the most part. In areas where it was a little bit warmer throughout the state, parts of the Champlain Valley and the southern part of the state were areas where I heard more reports of maybe a little bit less than their target, but quality was certainly good. The normal reports of off-flavored syrup trickling in a little bit at the end of the season. But I shouldn't even say that it's the end of the season, because we have producers, even on this call, it looks like producers who are still going. So there are parts of the state, there's such a dynamic range of climates, even just within our state, that there are people who have been done for several weeks, and there are folks who are still at it. And I guess social distancing is sort of, you might say, baked into the pie of sugaring. So a lot of folks are trying to stay safe, and they're able to continue working, which is great. I would say a couple of concerns. Folks who are selling into the bulk market are concerned about the bulk price. By and large, that bulk price is driven by the exchange rate with the Canadian dollar. And you probably know that the Canadian dollar is relatively weak at this point. It's about 70 cents to the dollar. And since the Quebec Federation effectively sets the bulk price of syrup, anytime the Canadian dollar is weak, US producers tend to feel that effect as well. Certainly, I've heard from producers who have lost significant sales during open house weekend, and those tend to be the producers who rely even more on that for an influx of cash. So it may not show up on the large balance sheet, but for those individual producers, that's significant. So ways in which they could be supported, I could certainly see better access to broadband so that more producers can be online and getting a chance to sell to people maybe in other parts of the country who haven't experienced pure maple syrup. I think that would be important. So I'm happy to stop now and hear what everyone else has to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I just want to say on the broadband, that's something where Republicans and Democrats are really united on that. This is an area where I work well with a lot of my Republican colleagues because they have rural districts. So the challenges we face with telemedicine in rural Vermont, the challenges we face with marketing, you absolutely have to have that broadband. And I think we're going to make some progress. So thank you for that.
Yep, that would be great.
And go ahead.
Do we have Mark Cannella on the call? And if not, we'll just go to Q&A.
Yeah.
Hi, Mark.
Mark Cannella. I can add in a few things real briefly, but I think the Q&A will be most important. Mark Cannella, UVM Extension, Agricultural Business. Again, glad to be on the call and glad to have a chance to convene with people who have probably been pretty busy these past several weeks. Just want to give the update. We do have a group of business educators with UVM Extension that are available and are inviting any inquiries from business owners as people are trying to navigate the federal program access, unemployment insurance, or unemployment assistance programs, and some of the midterm strategy on maybe pivoting to online sales or different market channels. So I'll put our website up in the chat box there. I'll just say that I've certainly had a few inquiries from maple producers over the past few weeks, mostly some of the distress about cash flow interruption, folks that have been unable to reach those direct farmers markets. So glad to hear from Secretary Tebbets that the farmers markets will be back open again with safe protocol. There's certainly concern, I think, from producers recognizing even with the markets open, they're not quite sure how the change in tourist flow over the seasonal summer and fall months will impact the customer flow through markets and the potential lack of spontaneity with people sampling goods and, kind of an impulse, not an impulse, but a spur of the moment purchase there that may be different than the pre-orders. So we're aware of that. Certainly have taken a few calls on the PPP and EIDL program for the round one and have been working with people on eligibility and connecting them to commercial lenders to process final applications. So we'll welcome that as the guidance comes out on the second round of the SBA programs and be glad to work with any business owner on that. I think I'll stop there and let the business owners chime in with questions.
Well, thank you, Mark. All right, so let's go with questions.
And if you're on the phone and you don't have access to the chat box, of course, just unmute yourself and speak up for sure. Sounds like maybe Secretary Tebbets and Congressman Welch are meeting everyone's needs. So, if we don't have questions, for sure.
Well, I know Roger Brown wanted me to make a pitch to the Danish ambassador to start buying Vermont maple syrup. So when I get a chance to do that, I will.
Please do. That'd be great.
Well, I'll ask a question about that Canadian dollar and just I'd love a little elaboration on that and how it is impacting our ability to sell into the international market. Is Mark there, or maybe Anson knows that?
Mark or Emma, do you want to talk about that?
Emma?
Emma, do you want to take that or do you want me to?
Yeah, I think right now it's a little early to tell what the impact of that will be. Historically, we have certainly struggled getting Vermont maple syrup into the international market as compared to what the Canadians have been able to do. A big part of that is based on currency exchange, and frankly, a significant part of that is also based on the development programs available to folks in Quebec in particular, as it relates to getting their product to market outside of Canada. So I anticipate continued challenges in developing the export market But is certainly demand and interest in pure maple syrup abroad. And I anticipate that interest will continue to grow. So the opportunity is certainly there. We've just got to find the key differentiators that work for us as Vermont maple sugar makers.
I would just add too that, with Quebec producing 70% of the world's syrup, and the way they're organized, they can certainly set a price, and we need to build more incentive for a premium price for our product and domestic product. And because if you're buying in bulk and you can buy from the Federation for 30% less, and if your customers are willing to accept that, then there's a economic incentive to do so. And we have a demand. Yep.
Any other questions out there? Go ahead.
Roger Brown here.
Go ahead, Roger. I just told people you wanted me to lobby the Danish ambassador.
Well, I had a more serious question related to that, and then sort of a less serious question. But there is an 8% duty on U.S. syrup going into Europe that there's not on Canadian syrup. So I think there are trade-related issues that we've as sort of the national political climate has the effects trickle down of all of those things. But there's a company in Denmark that sells syrup called Vermont syrup, and I'd sent Ryan McLaren. He had seen the brand. He was in Europe last year and seen it. In all seriousness, it seems like a pretty clear ripoff of our state, and it's a Danish company that's doing it. That was my point there. But the trade related things are real issues.
Well, they are. In the trade policy in this administration has been aggressive, but not particularly effective. And the effects of a lot of these tariffs have been to punish American producers. I mean, we've got real issues with China, but using the presidential authority for emergency declaration of tariffs, which was intended by Congress when it was passed to be in the event of essentially a military threat, is a real stretch when the object of the emergency is the actions is Canada and the European Union, our allies. And there's, among other things, I'm very concerned about what I regard as an overreach of power by the executive, because the tariff authority constitutionally is in the House of Representatives. And when the House, I think it was back in the Eisenhower years, provided some emergency authority to the president, it was in a context of having some confidence that there wouldn't be overreaching by the executive. And I'm not sure we're entitled to that confidence now. So now here we have this situation where the syrup from Vermont is subject to an 8% tariff, and we're competing with Canada where they've got a 30% kind of currency advantage. So Roger, you make a really, really good point.
We had a couple of questions in the chat box, and Donna Young wanted to know if the Canadian border was open for the exchange of maple syrup. Does somebody have a feel for that?
Anson, do you know that?
My understanding, Congressman, and others, that trade is open between the border with goods.
Okay. We had another question about the $20 billion for ag and the CARES Act, and curious if any of that will reach maple specifically.
I think it's going to be tough. There's a lot of discretion in there to the Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, and of the commodity crops in the commodities in agriculture. are all hurting. I mean, there's just without going into commodity-based sort of domination of the farm bill. Right now, you've got everything from obviously the hogs in the Midwest, and a lot of the corn crop, the soybeans that have been devastated by the tariffs and the retaliatory action by China. There is an immense amount of pain in the agricultural sector, and of course in Vermont, dairy has really been hammered. The price plunge. We were doing okay in January and February, and then when the coronavirus came, the floor just went out from underneath the milk price. Anson may want to elaborate on this, but we can advocate for it and would, but we'd have to be specific as to what the losses were. But from what I understand, the various challenges that we've had in maple, the season, well, we've heard today the season was relatively good, and the amount of money that's in the farm bill for ag is way less than we're going to need. So I can't make any promises about what would come to maple. Anson, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yes, Congressman. Yeah, the secretary, you're right, does have a large discretion, and he's dividing it between livestock, dairy, et cetera. There are going to be, and there may be some dairy producers on the line that also do maple, so there are going to be direct payments issued to farmers based on their losses, with a cap of all dairy farmers of $125,000. Now, some of the forecasting, of course, for dairy is really quite sad, and it's quite scary what's going to happen over the next 3 or 4 months if the forecasts are real. Another pocket to keep an eye on, and I don't know if it's an opportunity for maple. They are going to buy up some commodities and give them to the needy, and I just don't know if maple could be on that. They're going to put out a proposal very soon and have people sign up as vendors. There may be some products of maple that could fall under that. I don't know. And there's also a small pocket related to specialty crops, and that is usually where funding comes for maple. And we probably need to do a little bit more research on that if there's any potential dollars for that. But there is a little bit of pocket in the CARES Act that was passed, under which has the discretion of the secretary under specialty crops. And we've been urging the USDA to try to send those dollars in block grants so we can get it out to the producers quickly and not necessarily go through all the rules and regulations and paperwork through USDA that might help with some of those things. So we're going to keep pushing for sort of a block grant format, and if we can get that through, but there might be some pockets there, and we'll try to do a little more research on that.
Oh, thanks, Anson. Any other questions?
We had a question about, yeah, there was a question about the bulk price dropping further. Let's see. So is there a concern that the bulk price could drop further, especially with the flooding of the bulk buyers early, so prior to the shutdown? That looks likely again as they open back up and producers look to move all that syrup that they have in stock all at once. Is there a concern that that bulk price could drop again?
Maybe Mark, you can answer that.
Does anyone on that side of
Well, I certainly probably Emma, being one of the large packers, might be better suited to answer it. But I would say that according to some of our estimates, 90% of the bulk price is derived from the exchange rate. So I think exchange rate plays a huge role in the long term. In the short term, perhaps, with the disruptions, large packers like Bascom's and others not buying syrup for the short term, it's hard to say how it's going to play out. I think the demand for maple is strong, though, so I would be optimistic that it wouldn't change that much. The Federation certainly isn't going to their price dramatically in a short period of time. That would be my assessment. But Emma, please add to that.
Emma, yeah.
Yeah, so
Emma?
I would reiterate what Mark said in terms of demand being strong. Maple syrup is a comfort food. It's something very familiar for folks. All of us are spending a lot more time eating at home than we have over the last few months or years. And maple syrup is clearly a food that is consumed in high proportion at home. So in the very short term, I see demand being strong. Longer term, we've seen really positive trends in terms of consumers becoming educated about pure maple as an alternative to more conventional sweeteners. So I think the outlook there is very positive as well. And Mark is absolutely right that the driver of prices here domestically is really the Federation price in conjunction with the exchange rate, and clearly crop size plays a role in that. But the overarching influencer there is really that currency exchange rate. I would anticipate that once prices are set here in the spring, that they will largely hold, and that the patterns of pricing we've historically seen in terms of fluctuations will probably follow those historic patterns of price fluctuations that have been seen, which are, I would say, traditionally not that significant. Prices tend to be set in the spring and tend to hold. And I would anticipate that that would be the case this year as well. But this is a time of uncertainty, and lots of rules of thumbs have been challenged. So could it change? Sure. Do I see it being likely? No, given the strong demand and that prices are being actively set right now.
Thank you, Emma. Any questions? Well, anybody want to make some closing comments if we don't have any questions or anything in the chat? Anson, you want to say anything?
Sure. Well, I do, and I know that the closing of the sugar houses and the impact that had was significant on folks about not having that retail activity at the sugar house, and just the marketing that goes with it, and somehow if we get the all clear sign, I think maybe we can recreate that later in the year if we have to. I went and froze all the snow I possibly could freeze, and I put it in my freezers in tubs because I have this envision that we're going to have a big sugar on snow party across the state. And I remember doing it at our church years and years ago when I was little, that we had it in August. And if you have sugar on snow when it's really hot out, and it's even more special. But they froze the snow, and I know we have all kinds of gadgets now that you can do shaved ice and whatever. But I thought, well, I'm just going to try to do that. So I have that in my mind when we get the all clear sign. We don't know when it's going to come, but I'm holding on to that because that's a special time of year. And I think we've got to remind ourselves of what we missed, and we got to recreate that stuff if we can. And if we get our minds together, we may have the biggest sugar on snow party in the world is my vision. But that's just me with my brain moving right now, which is moving pretty fast right now. But thank you all for doing it. Thank you, Congressman, for helping agriculture. Every week we hop on and try to do the best we can, and always something good comes from these calls. So thank you.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I don't think that was your brain working. I think that was your heart working. and this challenge that we have, because there's so many practical challenges, and the anxiety people, all of us have about health and about the economy. We've got to find something to be grateful for. And I think all of us would like to be at your spectacular sugar on snow party when the times allow. You've got the You've got the snow, and the folks on the line have got the sugar. So we're going to have us a nice little reunion. That's great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else want to make a parting remark? I thank everybody out, everybody who's on the call, but especially the folks who gave us the benefit of the information they have. Thank you all. Alice, Emma, Mark, and Mark. See you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.